Hello, Meoni here, and welcome back to another video. This time around, I want to talk about the trust system, my summary of it in 5.0, where I think it could go in the future, and ultimately what I've been doing in my spare time, which is getting them all to level 80. So firstly, my summary of the trust system. Personally, I think that the trust system in Shadowbringers has been quite useful. Even more useful now that we know that there isn't going to be a deep dungeon series in the 5.x series. That was confirmed in a previous live letter. Before then, a lot of us were going through the expansion pretty much waiting to level our alternate jobs. Most of the people I knew, simply because we were waiting for the day they would inevitably add another deep dungeon. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, and now we have more recently confirmation that isn't going to be the case in this expansion, and they're using the funds that would usually be put into that budget for a deep dungeon into other things, which is absolutely fine. And then they cut away an extra dungeon from us as well to, again, move the budget into bigger and better sort of trials, and indeed the MSQ, which has actually resulted in a better storyline, I believe, and some really epic fights. It's one of those opinion-based things. You might completely hate the content that they've prioritized this expansion, or you might love it. I happen to be in the latter of those categories and would much rather have a stronger main storyline with better, raid content and actually sort of extreme difficulty trials than I would just to have lots of the other stuff, but that's my own personal opinion. Now, it's interesting to me to look at trust system in this game compared to Final Fantasy XI, because 11 had a trust system that essentially allowed you to talk to an NPC, finish a storyline with them, and then you were to be able to cast trust magic, which was to create a direct sort of mirage or a replica, a clone of that person for a limited amount of time that would essentially reflect a lot of their abilities and strengths nearly to the completion of that fact, to allow you to sort of level up. Now, the trusts in Final Fantasy XI were added very late into Final Fantasy XI's development, when the game essentially became much less popularized. And, currently, if you play Final Fantasy XI, you're not going to find that many people to play with, even though there are smaller communities, such as on the Azura server, which has a higher population than, anywhere else, in my opinion. You are going to find people to do stuff with, but it's going to be much more difficult to just randomly find somebody and ask them to join a party with you. So the trust system did sort of help in that regard. Now, in Final Fantasy XIV, the trust system has had the iteration of only doing certain dungeons, mostly the story mode dungeons through the 5.x series, which, whilst immediately sounds a little bit confusing why it would just be locked to that, mostly because if we did have the same sort of trusts that we had in Final Fantasy XI in this game, then there would be literally no reason to play with other people, which is the whole reason that the trust dungeons in themselves are much slower because of the AI, but at the same time the rewards are lower, and each run's completion is going to be a much lower it's going to take longer to complete them than it is to play with a full party, which is obviously the biggest caveat. The plus side of trust, though, in 5.0 is that a lot of people have told me that they prefer to run with their trusts simply because they can achieve what they wanted to do. They can get their tomestones from the level 80 ones, and you can also, reliably play an alternate job without the fear and obviously the anxiety issues that might involve ordinarily. So it's actually quite an interesting tool to help people socially, to actually allow them to practice a little bit, especially at level 80, on jobs before they play with other people. Personally, if it was me, I would say don't listen to other people. Just go in there, learn the mechanics of the bosses. That's your first priority. To stand out of ability, out of AoEs and things like that, and then focus on your DPS or healing or whatever afterwards, right? Your priority is just to get through the actual fight. It doesn't matter how much DPS you're doing, to me personally, as long as the boss dies. And that's how anybody should look at a fight. Primarily, though, you can, once you have that nailed down, the mechanics of a boss fight or a dungeon in particular, then you can work on the rest of it. But it gives you a great bit of freedom in the trust system to experiment, and try things out. Like, for example, my monk, I'm really not very good at monk. I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. Now, I'm looking at little guides here and there and stuff in the background, But, you know, I quite like the trust system to practice out in, so that if I make a mistake, or, you know, if there's something I do that might not be up to someone else's idea of a speed run, because a lot of people try to do things as fast as possible, perhaps they don't want me to be in there, which my answer would be, you should probably queue as a pre-made, so you actually avoid that situation. You know, you essentially are able to just take it at your own pace. Which is something that you can't do elsewhere. So it's obviously got its own advantages, but it's obviously got its own withdrawal symptoms as well, such as obviously being a lot slower if you are going to level things up. So let's move on to why I actually wanted to get my trust completed, i.e. every single trust to level 80, which is something I actually managed to do the other day. And it's something that I spent my weekend doing. I know a lot of people spent their weekend doing stuff that was productive and exciting. I did the trust system. What can I say? So essentially, when you get them all to level 80, you get yourself a little achievement and you get yourself a title, which is something I'll probably never use because there are way better titles than that, with much more prestige behind them, or better titles in general. But you also get the ability, when you go onto your trust window, to cast glamours on the trust. Now, it's not what you think. It's a lot more mundane, unfortunately. If you right click, say for instance on Y'shtola here, you'll see that there's a glamours option. If you press this button, essentially you can toggle between her Shadowbringers mode in her Black Mage outfit, as you normally see her in Shadowbringers, to actually her Scion Healer robe, if you remember that, the white number, which is really cool. She will, and all the trusts, maintain their current weapon style, and indeed she will, like everyone else, hold a current Shadowbringer's weapon, so the Black Mage stave, and she'll still be a Black Mage. There's no way of changing their jobs or anything like that, but she will visually change to her more frequently used Scion Healer outfit that you might be more familiar with in the previous expansions and indeed base game. So it's quite interesting, it's quite fun, and quite bizarre actually to do a run of a dungeon where everybody is wearing their old outfits, but obviously with their new jobs. So you have Thancred wearing his sort of like roguey ninja stuff, but he's still wielding his gunbreaker weapon, which is quite surreal, like I say, but quite fun. It's a little cosmetic distraction. There is no other reason to get them all to level 80 other than for those cosmetic rewards. Although there is obviously the side effect of being able to do the level 80 story modes, story dungeons, without other players. Now, I have confirmed that a run, for example, of Amnesis and Ida does actually give you the full rewards like it normally would with other players. So obviously you have access to the minion that drops in there and any of the other story mode dungeons without the need of rolling against anyone else. If it does drop, goes straight into your inventory, so that's a big bonus if you're a minion hunter. And there's also the fact you get tomestones per completion, which is a really big deal to me personally. It might take longer, it might be more stressful, but I can pretty much play whatever I want, have an instant queue, sort of babysit the trust AI, which isn't the best, through the content, and get all of the rewards I usually would, with no problems, and no people that might be new to the content sort of messing it up. It's a really interesting thing, but the price you pay for that is the time investment into it, right? It's not that time efficient, nor is it very experience efficient or guild efficient. It's simply for those people who have those specific requirements. And in many ways, I think that's something that really makes the trust system shine in this expansion. It's a really interesting feature that we didn't need to have, but it's definitely something that now we have it, is probably something I wouldn't want to be without. It's such a minor change and really isn't mandatory, but it has made the game much more accessible for more people to sort of practice in and do what they want, whenever they want, no matter what time it is or whatever server they play on. So in many ways, I'd like to say that the trust system was one of the biggest highlights of Shadowbringers, and anybody who's disappointed by it usually comes down to the fact that they're, in their opinion, it simply comes down to them not having a use for it personally, and I can completely understand that, and I believe that the trust system has a long way to go. There's a lot of development needs to be worked into that, and perhaps its own separate set of rewards maybe even time-related ones. This could be the start of a challenge mode series, I'm not sure, but there's so much that they can do, especially now the AI that is shown, albeit a little bit ropey in compared to a real player. They have really coded them quite well. If you compare them to the Adventurer Squadrons, I did a lot of videos on those. Basically what I said many months ago, well, a couple of years ago now, when we did the Adventurer Squadron mission dungeons, every time there was a new one out, I would essentially give my impressions on it, what I thought about it, and if they'd made any significant changes. Now, they'd changed the behavior patterns, and you could essentially see what did evolve into the trust system, and it was a really fun thing to see. Is it actually evolved to where I wanted it to be at this sort of time period? I would have to say no. I think mechanically, yes, but no. I wanted it to evolve to the point where you could do alliance raids, like old alliance raids. It doesn't matter if they take really long time, but if I can guarantee that I can get the minion from for example, like let's see, Void Ark or something, without having to roll against other players, even if it takes me 4 hours, I would rather do that than have my terrible rolls how they currently are, where I roll anywhere from a 1 to a 10. So yeah, my RNG is terrible on his character. I really want to see them advance this, do some more interesting things, perhaps even involve, like, can you imagine doing a whole grand company event, sort of like scenario style, where you go through a big war front, with an army and you give out orders, sort of like a tactical game mode. It wouldn't be that difficult to incorporate into this game now that the AI is a fixture and a feature that they could use. So yeah, what do you think will be the natural evolution of this? Do you want it to evolve at all? Are you one of these people who thinks that it added nothing to the game and actually took away from it, which is something they really try desperately to not do? They just tried to have it as an alternative and deliberately nerfed it as much as possible so that there was still incentive to play with other people, but perhaps they failed at that. I'm not sure. Everyone's opinion is different, and I'm really interested to see what you think about this. We've talked about the trust system and Adventurer Squadrons and AI before, obviously, and it's not going to stop anytime soon. I personally think there's a lot of room to grow and advance with this, and it's something that they should stick with. Now, in terms of development time, I'm a little bit kind of confused where all of the budget is going from that deep dungeon, but I'm excited to see what happens. I think by the end of Shadowbringers, I will probably have 1 of 2 sort of summaries for it, if it was money well spent, basically how you would judge the expansion as a whole. So far, it's looking to be one of the best expansions that we have had since Heavensward, in my opinion. Way above Stormblood already. Again, these are my opinions, but let me know what you think so far, what you would like to see next. Maybe you would like open world trusts. Is that something that would break the game? I am not sure. Let's have a discussion in this in the comment section. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you all next time.